On March 7, 1971, Todd Kohlhepp was born in Burbank County, Florida, USA. 2 years after the boy's birth, his parents divorced. Todd remained living with his mother but was unable to build a warm relationship with either her or his father. When Todd's mother remarried, the boy took the surname of his stepfather, Samsel. However, Todd also had constant difficulties communicating with him. The boy experienced significant problems in social interaction and was unable to fully communicate with peers and other people. Todd perceived every person he met as a potential rival. From kindergarten, he constantly conflicted with other children, often got into fights, and broke other people's things. In any situation, Todd acted extremely aggressively, as if he was unable to control his own emotions, especially anger. At home, the boy's behavior was also far from friendly. From an early age, he began to treat animals cruelly. He killed a goldfish with bleach and shot a dog with an air rifle. Sadistic inclinations accompanied Todd throughout his life and became an integral feature of his personality. At the beginning of his school years, Todd's mother, together with her new husband, moved to South Carolina. In 1982, the couple divorced, and the very next year, the woman entered into a new marriage. 12-year-old Todd, despite his young age, provoked conflicts in the house every day. His behavior was so uncontrollable and aggressive that his mother and stepfather, fearing for their own lives, placed the boy in a psychiatric clinic. However, this did not give the desired results. The family hoped that the change of scenery after moving to South Carolina would soften Todd's character and lead to positive changes, but this did not happen. Soon the boy stated that he did not like living here and expressed a desire to move in with his biological father. Since his parents' divorce, Todd had not communicated with or seen his father for 8 years. He lived in Arizona, and probably the son believed that moving would allow him to start a new life and look at it from a different angle. However, after moving to the city of Tempe, Arizona, it became obvious that there was no hope for positive changes in Todd's behavior. His father described his son as a person capable of feeling only anger. Here, too, he was repeatedly admitted to psychiatric institutions for treatment. Despite all efforts, the situation only worsened. In August 1986, when Todd was only 15, he committed his first serious crime. One Saturday, having gone out into the street, the teenager met his 14-year-old neighbor Christy Granada. By deception, luring the girl into his father's house, Todd locked himself in a room with her, tied her up, put a gun to her head and raped her. This attack was not planned. Todd and the victim had little communication before, only saying hello during chance encounters. After the rape, Todd threatened to kill the girl herself, her brothers, sisters and her entire family if she told anyone about what happened. The teenager scared the victim so much that she really intended to remain silent. She had no idea that her relatives were already starting to worry and were actively looking for her. Shortly before the incident, the parents explained to the children how to act in emergency situations. The missing girl's younger brother, worried about her absence, called the police. Luckily, just at the moment when he was talking to law enforcement, Todd released his victim and she returned home. The girl was forced to tell where she had been and what had happened to her. The 15-year-old criminal was arrested. From the very beginning, Todd showed no concern for the fate of the victim, he was only interested in the prison term that awaited him. The defender argued that his client had stumbled but would not harm others in the future. For the first time, Todd went to jail for a long time, 15 years. In prison, the teenager's behavior changed dramatically. His cruel nature almost did not manifest itself, he became an exemplary prisoner. But in fact, he was masterfully hiding his inner struggle and innate cruelty. On November 24, 2001, at the age of 30, Todd was released. He had spent half his life behind bars, but this time had not been wasted. In prison, he received a college education with a degree in computer technology. After his release, the man decided to return to South Carolina to be close to his mother. Now she could not object to this. It seemed that in prison Todd had embarked on the path of correction and decided to integrate into society. To do this, he needed to find a decent job. Due to difficulties in communicating with people, it would be difficult for him to work in a team. Therefore, the man decided to engage in private activities. After changing several jobs, mainly as a designer, he only became convinced of this desire. 5 years after his release, in 2006, 35-year-old Todd applied for a real estate sales license in South Carolina. In response, he was told that they could not grant him a license since he was in the register of sex offenders. It seemed that the man had no chance to start his own business. But Todd, having learned to masterfully hide his cruel nature, became cunning and prudent. He signed up for a personal meeting to explain his situation. During the conversation, the man told in detail about the long-ago incident, downplaying the degree of cruelty. He blamed everything on a youthful misunderstanding with a girl. According to him, everything happened by mutual agreement, but the partner was offended and decided to teach him a lesson, which is why he ended up behind bars. This deception made it possible to convince the licensing agency that it was just a simple misunderstanding, and that Todd himself deserved a second chance. Already in June 2006, Todd Samsel received a real estate agent license. A criminal with a conviction opened his own business and continued to lead the life of a respected, exemplary citizen, who was let down by an accident in his youth. His business was on the rise, bringing in good profits. The man became rich and achieved success. Interestingly, at the same time he became a real collector of weapons, having many pistols and rifles. By his own admission, Todd inherited this passion from his biological father, who also collected such things. Such an interest quite corresponded to the man's other hobbies. He loved everything associated with strength and power. Todd even got a pilot's license. He was attracted to motorcycles and fast cars. Outwardly, he seemed like a successful person with a very charismatic and strong character. But Todd was not the only successful man in town. In November 2003, 30-year-old Scott Ponder opened his own motorcycle dealership. In this business, he was helped by his 52-year-old mother, Beverly Guy, who worked with him. Scott also had a passion for this type of transport, so this business became a dream come true for him and prospered. Todd often visited the center, admiring the bikes, and eventually bought one for himself. In 2002, Scott's fiancée Melissa moved to him, and in January they got married. In June 2003, his wife found out about her pregnancy. The couple was expecting their firstborn. It seemed that this happy couple was going through the best period of their lives, not suspecting how dramatically everything could change in a matter of days. On November 6, 2003, Scott, as always, went to his dealership. His wife drove him and, passing by, they exchanged glances, and Scott blew her a kiss. Melissa headed to the medical center for her first ultrasound, an important and exciting event for future parents. Unfortunately, due to excessive workload, Scott could not accompany her, although he really wanted to see and hear the baby's heartbeat. Melissa was looking forward to her husband coming home to tell him how everything went. Instead, at 3 p.m., the woman received an alarming call from an employee of the store, who reported a shooting at the dealership. Despite the fact that Melissa was on the other side of the city, she immediately went to the scene. There was chaos. About a dozen police cars blocked roads. Melissa was not allowed to pass, even when she said that her husband Scott must be there. Within minutes, the anxious pregnant woman was told the terrible news: her husband was shot and killed during the attack on the dealership. The stunned Melissa tried to contact Scott's mother Beverly, who also worked that day. But it turned out that she was also shot. In total, 4 people were killed in this bloody massacre. The third victim was 29-year-old Brian Lucas, and at the time of Melissa's arrival, the fourth had not yet been identified. It later turned out that it was 26-year-old mechanic Chris Sherbert, who worked at the dealership. All the victims were shot in cold blood, practically point blank, but the identity of the killer remained unknown. At that moment, the pregnant woman's world collapsed. She lost her beloved husband and his mother, who were her support. The family business was in jeopardy, as there was no one to manage it. Despite all the difficulties that fell on her shoulders, Melissa managed to pull herself together and cope with the problems. In June 2004, she gave birth to a boy, whom she named Scott Locke in honor of his deceased father. All this time, the woman more than anything wanted to find out who deprived her husband of his life and left the child without a loving father. Law enforcement officers continued to investigate the high-profile crime. Given the brutality of the massacre, it was assumed that the criminal personally knew the victims and had a serious motive. However, there were no specific leads regarding the suspect. Business ties, relatives and friends of the deceased were analyzed, but a likely criminal could not be established. Nothing was missing from the store, all the witnesses were killed, and the video surveillance cameras in the dealership were not working that very day. Only at the end of 2004 were there unexpected developments in this case. Melissa was summoned to the police station. She hoped that the detectives would name the criminal. But instead, the young mother herself found herself in the interrogation room. The detectives reported that a few months ago, she accidentally left Scott Jr.'s diaper at the station. The police compared the child's DNA with samples found at the crime scene. And they did not match the DNA of Melissa's deceased husband. It was suggested that the woman did not become pregnant by her husband, but by a lover, so she had a motive to get rid of Scott. Melissa was so stunned that she suddenly turned from a victim into the main suspect. She even offered to carry out an exhumation of her husband's body, confident that only he could be the child's father and this would prove her innocence. Melissa was so convincing that the police decided to double-check everything. And they found their own mistake. The test tubes with DNA samples of Scott and Brian Lucas, collected at the crime scene, were incorrectly labeled. That's why the results didn't match. In fact, Melissa's son was indeed from the late Scott. Although the police admitted the unfortunate mistake, the woman's reputation was greatly damaged. The local community closely followed the events related to the bloody massacre in the motorcycle shop. Many people eagerly picked up the rumors about Melissa's alleged lover, and the gossip spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. People began to look askance at the woman, whispering behind her back about her alleged promiscuity. This finally broke Melissa's spirit. She decided to return with the child to her homeland, where no one knew her. She was afraid that the shameful publicity could affect her son's relationships with children in kindergarten and school. The year when Melissa was under suspicion dealt a crushing blow to her reputation. Now the young mother understood, the only way to start over was to return to where she came from. Meanwhile, the detectives again reached a dead end. There were no suspects in the brutal crime. The shooting remained unsolved for over 10 years. The main version, the attack was committed by some enraged employee or client who decided to vent his anger in such an extreme way. However, none of the employees were prone to conflict. Scott created a very comfortable atmosphere in the team. It was also not possible to find dissatisfied customers with a motive for reprisal. The investigators simply could not understand the motives of the attacker. During this period, Todd Samsel, on the contrary, prospered. He honed his professional skills and built a career as one of the best realtors in the city of Spartanburg, South Carolina. This continued until 2015. The 43-year-old real estate agent purchased a huge plot of land in Woodruff. It seemed that he intended to build a nice house there. After all, it was not for nothing that he bought such a spacious plot. After the purchase, Todd banned local hunters from even approaching his property, stating that their hunting days were over. He was really going to radically change the purpose of this area, but not at all as others imagined. On December 22, 2015, a married couple disappeared without a trace, 29-year-old Johnny Coxie and his 25-year-old wife Meagan. Unlike other well-off heroes of this story, the fate of the young couple was full of trials. In the past, both had problems with drug addiction. They had a child who was taken away by social services due to unsuitable conditions for upbringing. Law enforcement officers tracked the problematic couple, but to no avail. Attempts to determine their location by mobile phones also did not give any results. Probably, the devices simply did not work. Johnny and Meagan had almost no relatives or friends who cared about their fate, so the missing persons report was filed with a delay. No one particularly pressured the police, demanding an active search. There were no volunteers ready to organize search teams. And the police lacked resources, so the search was sluggish. No clues. The investigation reached a dead end. The public calmed down, assuming that anything could have happened to the drug-addicted couple. They simply stopped looking for them. On September 4, 2016, the worried father of the Carver family called the police, informing law enforcement officers that his son Charles, who had recently celebrated his 32nd birthday, had suddenly disappeared. According to the father, he and his son were on excellent terms and regularly communicated, usually by phone or messenger. During the conversations, the father and son discussed news from their lives and sports events. The last message from Charles was a short, "okay," after which he stopped communicating. Such a long silence, lack of any activity on the network and ignoring calls greatly alarmed the father, because nothing like this had ever happened before. Despite all the attempts of the Carvers to find out what happened to Charlie, they could not find out anything. It also turned out that another person had disappeared, Charles's new girlfriend, 30-year-old Carla Brown. The couple had only met 5 days ago at the Walmart supermarket, and now they had both disappeared without a trace. The young people had no addictions or any serious problems, so a spontaneous escape seemed absurd and was not considered as a possible option. The detectives decided to check the data on Charles and Carla's mobile phones to find out who they had been in contact with before they disappeared. It was established that shortly before this, Carla had been corresponding with a local successful realtor named Todd Kohlhepp. By the end of August, 32-year-old Charlie and his 30-year-old girlfriend had received several messages from Todd via social networks. The man had previously offered Carla to work on his plot, and this time he again approached her with a similar offer. However, there were no more clues. At first, the police did not pay much attention to the contacts with Todd, but over time, when the days of searching turned into weeks, and the investigation reached a dead end, they decided to check all possible versions more thoroughly. Close relatives of the missing couple also joined the active search. At the beginning of October 2016, it seemed that the investigation had again reached a dead end, but finally the detectives were able to establish the location of Charles and Carla's mobile phones at the time of the last communication. The direction finding showed that both phones were somewhere near the territory owned by Todd Kohlhepp and where he had invited the couple to work. The police found out the identity of the property owner, and the whole situation began to look very suspicious. So, 2 months after the disappearance of Charlie and Carla, on November 3, 2016, law enforcement officers found themselves on Todd's territory. One group went to the man's house, located in one part of his huge estate. The other group began to examine the rest of the site more carefully and soon found a lonely green metal container far from the road. Its color almost completely merged with the surrounding trees, making the container inconspicuous. Coming closer, the officers heard some sounds from inside and realized that there was someone alive there. It took a lot of effort to remove all the locks and cut the chains that were wrapped around the entrance to the container. When they finally managed to get inside, the police saw an exhausted, emaciated, but alive Carla, chained to the wall. Charlie was nowhere to be seen. The girl quickly explained that he had died a long time ago. According to the captive, when Todd brought her along with Charlie to his territory, as soon as they got out of the car, he immediately attacked them. Todd tied Charlie up and shot him in the chest, killing him on the spot. He chained Carla and left her in this container, where she spent a long 2 months. Upon learning that a captive had been found on his site, Todd initially feigned surprise and tried to deny everything. However, there was no point in this, because Carla described the attack in detail and confirmed that he was the attacker. The girl managed to survive 65 days of terrible captivity. She said that the criminal regularly raped her, was extremely cruel, tortured her and treated her like a slave or his property. Carla endured it all, afraid to resist and hoping that they were looking for her and would eventually save her. It seemed to her that if she tried to escape or fight back, Charlie's fate would befall her too. Having examined the territory around the container, the police found 3 shallow graves. In one, they found Charlie's naked body, and in the other two more unknown people, about whom Kala knew nothing. Only thanks to fingerprint examination it was possible to determine that they were Meagan and Johnny Coxie, who disappeared a year ago. The motives for these horrible kidnappings, tortures and murders remained unclear for now. There was no connection between the victims, they didn't even know each other. Only the criminal himself could shed light on these secrets. Todd was arrested and taken into custody. During the first interrogations, the investigators tried to find out the details of the crimes he committed and get a confession. Surprisingly, it turned out that the rapist and murderer was ready to cooperate and even strived for it. However, instead of explaining the bodies found on his territory and the rescued hostage, Todd began to talk with undisguised pride about some shooting 13 years ago. Samsel confessed that he adored motorcycles and often visited the dealership owned by Scott and his family. He even became friends with the owner through common interests and frequent visits. Todd bought a motorcycle there, but later he became disenchanted with it and began to think about other options. Samsel tried to return the purchased bike, but Scott refused to accept it and even laughed at Todd, greatly infuriating him. The man did not show his anger in any way, but the resentment and anger deeply ingrained in his mind. Eventually Todd decided to take brutal revenge, and on November 6, 2003, he came to the salon, as always walking between the rows of motorcycles, waiting for there to be no visitors left. And then he took out a gun and began to shoot all the employees in cold blood. Scott and Brian, seeing what was happening, rushed to escape to the exit, but the bullets caught up with them already outside the door. After this mass murder, Todd somehow managed to avoid punishment, which only intensified his sense of impunity and thirst for violence. He could no longer be stopped. Over time, he again wanted to shed someone's blood, so new crimes were only a matter of time. While talking about the shooting at the motorcycle salon, Todd showed no signs of remorse or regret. On the contrary, it was obvious that he was proud of what he had done. Like many other serial killers, he sought to impress others with his achievements. Murders turned into a means of self-affirmation and gaining recognition for him. After these chilling revelations, the detectives contacted Melissa, Scott's widow. She was shocked by the news that it took 13 years to find out the circumstances of the tragedy that happened in their family business, and to identify the killer. She was particularly struck by the incompetence and inaction of law enforcement agencies, which at one time even tried to accuse her of this. They did nothing until the blood of the next victims was spilled. If the police had not visited Todd's site then, looking for the missing couple, then probably the case of the 2003 shooting would have remained unsolved. At further interrogations, the insolent criminal could no longer be stopped. He willingly gave out more and more chilling details of his atrocities. The offender did not hide his pleasure when he began to talk about the details of other crimes, including the murder of a young couple, Meagan and Johnny Coxie. As it turned out, the last place where they were seen alive was the very site of Todd Samsel. The man offered them a job on his territory. The couple, who were going through difficult times financially, readily agreed to this offer. However, Todd did not immediately massacre them. At first, he reassured Meagan and Johnny by offering simple tasks for a good salary. In fact, the killer was just taking the opportunity to make them work on his land for as long as possible. But the fate of the unfortunate couple was decided already after the first meeting with Todd. He closely watched them and quite quickly realized that they were ideal victims whose disappearance was unlikely to be noticed by anyone. On December 19, 2015, the realtor, who by that time had managed to win the trust of Meagan and Johnny, invited them once again to come and clear some debris on the territory of his estate. Todd himself picked them up and took them to a remote corner of his possessions. As soon as the young couple got out of the car, Todd, without wasting time, shot Johnny. The man died on the spot, and his wife, confused and horrified, froze in anticipation of her fate. However, as in the case of Kala, the killer was in no hurry to immediately take Meagan's life. There was a large metal container on the site, which was usually used as a mobile warehouse. But from now on it turned into a torture chamber for the unfortunate woman. Meagan spent about a week here, desperately trying to escape. She even started a fire, hoping to attract someone's attention. During interrogations, Todd admitted that the captive behaved like a cornered beast and caused too much trouble. Therefore, he decided to get rid of her as soon as possible, brutally shooting the woman in the back of the head. Unlike the wayward Meagan, the obedient Kala was able to save her life with her obedience. Near the same container that served as an improvised prison, there was already Johnny's grave. Todd dug another hole nearby and buried his wife there. After that, the psychopath returned to his usual work as a real estate agent, pretending that nothing had happened. Although in fact, he was already looking for a new victim for his perverted torture. According to Todd Samsel's confessions, he had at least 7 murders and 1 kidnapping on his account. Of course, the investigation and trials for all these episodes would have taken an extremely long time and resources. Therefore, the prosecutor's office offered the criminal a deal, life imprisonment instead of the death penalty in exchange for his pleading guilty on all counts. Todd agreed to these conditions and on May 26, 2017, he was sentenced to 7 life terms, which were to go one after the other. 1 life sentence for each life taken, plus another 60 years for the abduction of Kala Brown. In July 2019, hearings were held on a civil lawsuit initiated by the victims of Todd Samsel's crimes and their relatives. They demanded compensation for damages from the firm owned by the convicted murderer. Kala, who spent more than 2 months in the psychopath's captivity, described in detail her stay in the terrible container, constant bullying and unbearable pain. While the girl was talking about all those horrors, Todd kept his eyes on her, listening carefully to every word. However, his gaze remained completely indifferent. Kala bravely looked her tormentor straight in the eye. It was a real revelation for herself. When the story came to an end, Samsel's lawyer asked what amount of compensation she would like to receive. But the girl could not name a specific figure. As it turned out, the issue of money worried Kala the least. She explained that it was extremely important for her to meet face to face with her abuser, look him in the eye and thus overcome her own fears. The torture victim understood that no amount could return her dead boyfriend or compensate for the 2 stolen months of life. During the hearings initiated by Scott Ponder's family, his widow Melissa also spoke about all the suffering she had to endure after her husband's murder. The woman explained how difficult it was to raise a son on her own, deprived of paternal care. The most touching moment of the process was the moment when their 13-year-old child resolutely walked up to the killer, looked him straight in the eye and said that he forgave him. Melissa could not contain her pride in her son Scott Locke. She was sure that his father, if he were alive, would certainly have approved of such an act. Despite his young age, the boy showed remarkable strength of character and maturity. In August 2020, Todd Samsel's property was sold at auction, and the proceeds were distributed among the families of his victims. But the story of the serial killer did not end there. Since then, Todd has repeatedly hinted that there were more victims. He repeatedly mentioned at least 2 additional murders, although he avoided details. Law enforcement officers have not yet been able to establish the identities of these possible victims or find their bodies. Investigations into Samsel continue to this day. The police suggest that Todd could have abused his position as a realtor to gain people's trust, gain access to their homes and commit various crimes. However, these versions currently remain unproven. Acquaintances described Todd differently. One of his clients, who sold a house through him, remembered the realtor as a very sociable and professional man. At the same time, she noted that Samsel often talked about his collection of weapons and openly flirted with her. But Todd's former colleague remembered him quite differently, hot-tempered, aggressive and unable to control himself. Another employee said that Samsel often watched pornographic films even at work. As it turned out later, Todd often visited the restaurant where one of his victims, Meagan Coxie, worked. Probably, that's where they met. According to the staff of the establishment, the man liked to flirt with the waitresses and had a reputation as an inveterate womanizer. The creepy reviews that Todd left on marketplaces also spoke volumes. So, commenting on a shovel with a folding handle, he advised to always keep it in the car. Suddenly you have to urgently bury bodies, and there is no ordinary shovel at hand. Describing a knife, the psychopath noted that he had not yet stabbed anyone with it, but hoped to do it with the help of such a wonderful tool. And in a review of a padlock, Todd wrote that a reliable container should be equipped with 5 such locks so that the prisoner has no chance of escape. At that time, for some reason, no one paid attention to these ominous reviews. However, not only Todd himself was accused of his crimes, but also his accomplice, Dustin Dawson. This man knew perfectly well that he was dealing with a convicted criminal, but in the period from 2012 to 2016, he bought at least 12 firearms and 5 silencers for Samsel. It was thanks to Dawson that Todd assembled an impressive arsenal, which he later used for his brutal murders. In 2018, the defendant pleaded guilty to 36 counts related to illegal arms trafficking. In total, for these crimes, Dustin received 8 years and 3 months behind bars. On November 13, 2023, Dawson was released. But Todd Samsel is still in prison, and he will never step over its threshold again. Please write your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. For those who are new here, subscribing is the best way to stay updated on future content. Also give a like please. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for your support during this difficult time. Until next time, friends.